The cold steel of handcuffs bit into my wrists as I sat helplessly in my wheelchair, unable to move. People stared, whispered, pointed their phones. Sheriff Sheila towered over me, her badge catching the afternoon sunlight as she leaned down, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You think your disability gives you special rights in my town," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. "Your kind needs to learn respect." My modified van, my only means of independence, sat behind her, the bright yellow boot locked firmly on its wheel. The groceries I had spent an hour carefully selecting were scattered across the pavement. I had simply parked in a legal accessible space. That was my crime. It was in that moment, as tears of humiliation burned in my eyes, that something inside me hardened. This was not the first time Sheriff Sheila had targeted someone vulnerable, but I made a silent promise right there. I would make damn sure it would be her last. I never asked for much after the accident, just a little dignity and the freedom to live independently. 3 years ago, my life changed forever when a drunk driver swerved into my lane on Route 16. The collision shattered my spine, and the doctors told me I would never walk again. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. But I refused to let my wheelchair define me. I adapted. I fought. I learned to navigate a world that was not built for people like me. The insurance settlement was enough to modify my home with ramps and wider doorways. I installed grab bars in my bathroom and lowered the kitchen counters. Most importantly, I purchased a specially modified van with a hydraulic lift and hand controls. That van became my freedom, my legs, my independence, my connection to the world outside my four walls. With it, I could grocery shop, visit friends, attend physical therapy, and simply feel human again. I took pride in how I had rebuilt my life. I lived alone, but not in isolation. Independence meant everything to me. "You are doing remarkably well," my physical therapist, Sarah, had told me just last week. "Most people would have given up by now." "I am not most people," I had replied with a smile that I had worked hard to find again. Last Tuesday was a day like any other. The weather forecast promised clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect for running errands. I needed to restock my kitchen, so I made a list, grabbed my wallet, and headed to Westfield Market, the only grocery store in our small town of Riverdale. The parking lot was not particularly crowded when I arrived. I easily found an accessible parking space near the entrance. I checked twice to ensure my disability license plate was visible and my permit was properly displayed on the dashboard. Everything was in order as always. I lowered the van's hydraulic lift, descended to the pavement, and wheeled myself into the store. Grocery shopping requires strategy when you use a wheelchair. I carefully navigated the aisles, selecting items I could reach and occasionally asking for assistance with products on higher shelves. The cashier, Martha, greeted me warmly. We had developed a friendly rapport over the years. "Beautiful day out there," she commented as she scanned my items. "Perfect for getting out of the house," I agreed. "I might even take the scenic route home." The trip had been pleasant and unremarkable. I paid for my groceries and wheeled back to the parking lot, the plastic bags securely placed in the basket attached to my chair. That was when everything changed. From 50 feet away, I spotted something yellow attached to my van's front wheel. My heart sank as I approached. A boot. A bright yellow immobilization device clamped firmly to my tire. Next to my van stood a deputy from the sheriff's department, arms crossed, an unmistakable smirk on his face. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "There must be some mistake. I have proper permits." The deputy, whose name tag read Collins, barely glanced at me. His eyes were cold, disinterested. "No mistake. Sheriff's orders, improper permit display. What are you talking about? My permit is right there on the dashboard. My plates are clearly marked. Deputy Collins shrugged. Permit needs to be hanging from the mirror, not lying flat. That is according to county ordinance. I felt the blood rushing to my face. That is ridiculous. The permit is clearly visible. Rules are rules, he replied, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. You will need to pay the fine at the sheriff's office to get the boot removed. $300. $300 for a permit that was displayed but not hanging. Plus 50 for the boot removal fee, he added, now openly grinning. Sheriff Sheila runs a tight ship in Riverdale, no exceptions. As he walked away, I sat there, stunned and immobilized, not just by my disability but by the casual cruelty of what had just happened. My groceries would spoil. I was stranded. And for what? A technicality that seemed invented on the spot. That was the moment I realized this was not a mistake. This was a message, and it would not be the last one I received. The following morning, I called a taxi service to take me to the sheriff's office. The fare cost me nearly $40, money I had not budgeted for that month. The driver helped me into his vehicle, folded my wheelchair into the trunk, and drove me to the squat brick building that housed Riverdale's law enforcement headquarters. The sheriff's office sat at the edge of town, a renovated former post office with the American flag hanging limply outside. As the taxi driver helped me back into my chair, I steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. I was angry, but I was determined to remain reasonable. Surely, this could be resolved with a calm conversation. The reception area was frigid, both in temperature and atmosphere. A middle-aged woman with tightly permed hair sat behind bulletproof glass, barely looking up as I approached. I need to speak with Sheriff Sheila, I stated firmly. There has been a misunderstanding about my vehicle. The clerk continued typing for several long seconds before finally acknowledging my presence. Do you have an appointment? No, but this is urgent. My accessible van was booted yesterday for an invalid reason. I cannot get to medical appointments or even return home properly without it. She looked at me with an expression that bordered on pity mixed with impatience. Sheriff Sheila does not deal directly with complaints. You will need to fill out this form. She slid a document through the slot in the glass. Processing time is 2 to 4 weeks. 2 to 4 weeks. That is impossible. I need my vehicle now. I felt my composure beginning to crack. This is discriminatory. I have a right to discuss this with someone in authority. If you wish to pay the fine and have the boot removed immediately, that option is available to you. Her voice was monotone, rehearsed. The fee is $350. $350. The deputy said $300 plus $50 for removal. The fee increased as of this morning. I gripped the wheels of my chair tightly, trying to maintain composure. May I at least speak with a deputy or sergeant about this situation? You may wait if you wish. I cannot guarantee anyone will be available. She returned to her typing, effectively dismissing me. I waited for 3 hours in that lobby. Deputies came and went, casting curious glances in my direction but never stopping to speak with me. Finally, a young officer approached. Sir, we are closing for lunch. You will need to return this afternoon if you wish to continue waiting. I left the building, defeated but not broken. Instead of calling another expensive taxi, I wheeled myself to a small diner across the street. The effort left me exhausted, my arms burning from the exertion. At the counter, I ordered coffee and considered my options. As I sat there, an elderly man took the stool beside me. Saw you coming out of the sheriff's office, he commented, stirring sugar into his coffee. Let me guess, parking issue. I looked at him surprised. How did you know? Sheila's favorite revenue stream. He introduced himself as Harold, a retired schoolteacher. She got my daughter-in-law last month, claimed her handicap placard was suspiciously obtained. Took 3 weeks and $400 to get it sorted. As we talked, I discovered I was far from alone. Harold introduced me to 2 other patrons, a veteran named James who had been ticketed twice for expired decals that were not actually expired, and a woman named Patricia who had been fined for using a walker ramp too slowly and creating an obstruction. Sheila runs this county like her private kingdom, James explained, his weathered face hardening. Been that way since she was elected 4 years ago. No one stands up to her because no one can afford to make an enemy of the sheriff. Has anyone ever filed a complaint? I asked. Taken legal action? The 3 exchanged glances. Folks have tried, Patricia said softly. The complaints disappear. The county commission is afraid of her, and most people just pay the fines. It is cheaper than fighting. That evening, I called a legal aid office in the neighboring county. The attorney who answered listened patiently to my story. Unfortunately, this sounds familiar, she admitted. Sheriff Sheila has developed quite a reputation, but I must be honest with you, no one has ever successfully filed formal action against her. She has powerful connections in the county government and the state police. So there is nothing I can do. The helplessness in my voice was audible even to my own ears. I did not say that, the attorney replied carefully. I said no one has successfully filed yet. That does not mean it cannot be done. It just means it will be difficult. Are you prepared for difficult? As I hung up the phone, I looked out my window at the empty space where my van should have been parked. $350 would strain my fixed income severely, but this was no longer just about money or inconvenience. This was about dignity. This was about justice. Yes, I whispered to myself, I am prepared for difficult. What I could not have known then was just how difficult things were about to become. 2 days passed before I could gather enough money to pay the fine. I borrowed from my emergency fund, money I had been saving for potential medical expenses. The taxi ride back to the sheriff's office cost another $40. The clerk behind the glass took my payment without comment, stamped the receipt with mechanical efficiency, and informed me that a deputy would remove the boot within 24 hours. 24 hours, I questioned. I need my vehicle today. Staff limitations, she replied without looking up. Next in line, please. Another taxi, another $40. My frustration was building, but I reminded myself that soon this would be over. I would have my van back, and I would be more careful in the future. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I now understood the rules were different for people like me in Sheriff Sheila's jurisdiction. The boot was removed the following afternoon. I inspected my van carefully, relieved to find no apparent damage. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in days, believing the worst was behind me. The envelope arrived in the morning mail, official county letterhead. Inside was a citation for $350 for vehicle abandonment. According to the notice, my van had been left unattended for more than 72 hours in a public space, constituting abandonment under county ordinance. I read the citation 3 times, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. The address listed was indeed my apartment building, but I had parked in my assigned space, private property, not public. And how could they claim abandonment when they had immobilized my vehicle themselves? I immediately called my building manager, who confirmed what I already knew. Resident parking was private property, clearly marked, and not subject to county abandonment ordinances. This makes no sense, I told him. How can they claim my van was abandoned when they had booted it themselves? That is not the worst of it, he replied, his voice dropping. Your van is gone. What do you mean, gone? It was towed last night, around midnight. I thought you had arranged it. I felt physically ill. My van, my independence, my freedom, had been taken. Not just immobilized this time, but removed entirely. The citation had been issued after the fact, a paper justification for what was clearly targeted harassment. I called the number on the citation and was informed that my vehicle had been impounded at Hank's Towing on the outskirts of town. Another taxi, another $40 I could not afford. The pattern was becoming clear. Each incident drained my limited resources further, making it harder to fight back. Hank's Towing was a dusty compound surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The office was little more than a shed with a counter. The man behind it barely looked up from his magazine when I entered. I am here about my van, I explained. It was towed from my apartment complex last night. He checked a clipboard. Address. I provided my address and he nodded. Yep. Sheriff's orders. $300 for the tow, $75 for overnight storage. Plus you will need to settle that abandonment citation before release. This is outrageous, I protested. My van was in a private parking space. The sheriff has no jurisdiction there without a complaint from the property owner. The man shrugged. Not my department, I just tow where I am told. You want your van or not? I did not have that kind of money immediately available. I would need to make arrangements, transfer funds from my dwindling savings. I need to see my van first, I insisted. He pointed through the window toward the back lot. Out there, third row. I wheeled myself around the building, navigating the gravel with difficulty. When I found my van, my heart sank further. There were fresh scratches along the driver's side. The side mirror was hanging by its wires. The custom hydraulic lift had been damaged during the tow. The control panel was cracked and unresponsive. I took photographs with my phone, documenting every scratch, every dent. When I returned to the office, the attendant was on the phone. He held up one finger, signaling me to wait. Yeah, he is here now, he said into the receiver, looking pretty upset. He listened for a moment, then hung up. Who was that? I demanded. Nobody, he replied, but his eyes shifted away from mine. When I returned to my apartment building, I found my neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, waiting for me. He was an elderly man who had lived in the building for 30 years. He walked with a cane and often sat by the window overlooking the parking lot. I saw what happened last night, he said quietly. It was not regular tow truck drivers. It was the sheriff herself with 2 deputies. They came after midnight when they thought no one would be watching. You saw Sheriff Sheila? He nodded gravely. I could not sleep, so I was sitting by the window. She was supervising the whole thing. I heard her tell the deputies, make sure it cannot be traced back to us. Then she saw me in the window and stared right at me. It was unsettling. I thanked Mr. Rodriguez for the information and retreated to my apartment. My hands were shaking as I called the county police department, separate from the sheriff's office, to file a report about the damage to my vehicle. The officer who took my call sounded uncomfortable. Sir, vehicle damage during impoundment is a civil matter between you and the towing company. This was not a legal impoundment, I insisted, and I have a witness who saw Sheriff Sheila personally oversee the towing from private property. There was a pause on the line. I would recommend you file a written report, Come to the station and we can take your statement." The next morning, I took yet another taxi to the police station. The desk sergeant took my statement and photographs, assigning a case number and promising to investigate. I felt a small measure of relief. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. That relief was short-lived. When I called 3 days later to check on the status of my report, I was informed the case had been closed due to insufficient evidence of criminal intent. This was beyond harassment now. This was targeted intimidation, and it was escalating. As I hung up the phone, I realized the truth of my situation. The systems designed to protect citizens were part of the problem. If I wanted justice, I would need to create my own. I am not a naturally suspicious person. Before my encounters with Sheriff Sheila, I believed in the fundamental fairness of systems, even if they sometimes moved slowly. That belief was now shattered. If I wanted protection, I would need evidence, irrefutable, undeniable documentation of what was happening to me. It took nearly all my remaining savings to retrieve my van. The damaged lift required specialized repairs that would take weeks and cost thousands. In the meantime, I had to manually hoist myself into the driver's seat, a painful and exhausting process. But having my van back gave me something more valuable than convenience, a platform for gathering evidence. My first purchase was a set of dashboard cameras, front and rear, with motion activation and night vision capabilities. I installed them myself, carefully concealing the wires and ensuring the cameras had clear views of anyone who might approach my vehicle. Next came a doorbell camera for my apartment entrance and a security camera overlooking my parking space. I was not technically inclined before all this began. Necessity became my teacher. I learned to download footage daily, backing it up to secure cloud storage where it could not be confiscated or destroyed. I established a meticulous logging system, noting times, dates, and descriptions of any suspicious activity. It did not take long for the cameras to prove their worth. Within 3 days, I had footage of sheriff's department vehicles circling my apartment building multiple times daily, far more frequently than normal patrols would justify. Deputies would slow down as they passed my parking space, sometimes stopping to photograph my van. They never approached directly. They were being careful now, aware that I might be documenting their actions. What I needed was more sophisticated surveillance. I remembered a local mechanic named Ray who had modified my van initially. His shop specialized in vehicles for people with disabilities, and he had always struck me as straightforward and honest. I made an appointment to see him. Ray's shop was on the outskirts of town, a large garage with specialized equipment for customizing vehicles. When I explained my situation, his expression darkened. "Sheriff Sheila," he muttered, shaking his head. "She has been a plague on this county since she took office. Last year she cited me for improper business signage 3 times in 1 month. Cost me nearly $2,000 in fines before I could get a proper variance." "Then you understand what I am dealing with," I said. "More than you know." Ray lowered his voice, though we were alone in his office. "You are not the first person she has targeted, and you will not be the last unless someone stops her. What exactly do you need?" I explained my surveillance setup and its limitations. The cameras only show what happens outside. I need to know if they tamper with my van again, and I need audio as well as video. Ray thought for a moment. "I can help you, but you need to understand, what we are talking about exists in a legal gray area. Recording in public is legal, but recording conversations without consent is complicated territory. I am only interested in protecting myself and gathering evidence of harassment." He nodded slowly, Come back tomorrow, bring your van. The next day, Ray spent 6 hours working on my vehicle. He installed hidden cameras inside the cabin and underneath the chassis. He added audio recorders with voice activation. Most importantly, he installed a GPS tracker that would alert me if my van moved without my authorization. There is one more thing, Ray said as he finished. My cousin Lauren is a journalist with the State Tribune. She specializes in disability rights and government accountability. If you are serious about taking on Sheriff Sheila, you might need someone who can amplify your story. I hesitated. Going public would escalate the situation dramatically. But then I remembered the scratches on my van, the humiliation of being stranded, the drain on my limited resources. Give me her contact information, I decided. That evening, I submitted an anonymous tip through the State Tribune's secure online portal. I did not share everything, just enough to establish that there was a potential pattern of harassment against disabled citizens in Riverdale County. I did not expect an immediate response. To my surprise, Lauren called the next morning. Her voice was professional but kind. I received your tip, she said. If what you are describing is accurate, this is exactly the kind of story I cover. But I need more than anonymous allegations. I need documentation, witnesses, a pattern of behavior. I am gathering evidence, I assured her, and I am not the only victim. Give me 2 weeks, she replied. Document everything. Find others who will speak on record, build your case. Then we can meet in person. Over the next 10 days, my surveillance system proved its worth repeatedly. My cameras captured deputies photographing my license plate, looking through my windows, and once even testing my door handles at 3 in the morning. I documented 6 separate patrol cars circling my block at unusual hours. Each incident was logged, time-stamped, and backed up securely. I reached out to Harold, Patricia, and James from the diner. Each agreed to share their experiences with Lauren. Mr. Rodriguez provided a sworn statement about witnessing Sheriff Sheila overseeing the towing of my van. Ray connected me with 3 other disabled customers who had faced similar harassment. A pattern was emerging, not just of casual bureaucratic cruelty, but of systematic targeting of vulnerable citizens. Sheriff Sheila appeared to select victims who had limited resources, restricted mobility, or reduced capacity to fight back. She used the law not as a shield to protect, but as a weapon to control. As the 2-week mark approached, I organized my evidence into a comprehensive timeline. Videos, photographs, witness statements, official citations, all telling a single, undeniable story of abuse of power. What had begun as my personal fight for dignity was transforming into something larger, a reckoning. I did not know then how dangerous cornered power could become. Sheriff Sheila had resources, authority, and a badge. I had truth and documentation. The question remaining was, which would prove stronger in the coming storm? It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the knock came at my door. 3 sharp raps, authoritative and demanding. Through my newly installed peephole, I saw 2 men in uniforms I did not recognize. Not sheriff's deputies, but some other kind of county officials. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the security chain engaged. "Can I help you?" I asked. "County Code Compliance," announced the taller of the 2, flashing a badge too quickly for me to read. "We have received a complaint about unauthorized modifications to this residence. We need to inspect the premises immediately." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "Do you have a warrant?" The men exchanged glances. "We do not need a warrant for code violations inspection. It is a matter of public safety." This was a lie, and I knew it. I disagree. Without a warrant or prior written notice, you have no authority to enter my home. Please leave any relevant documentation in my mailbox and I will review it with my attorney. Sir, obstructing a code inspection is a violation carrying a $500 fine, the second man warned. We can return with police assistance if necessary. You mean sheriff's assistants? I asked pointedly. I would be happy to call them myself right now, along with my attorney and the local news station. I am sure they would all be very interested in this unannounced, unwarranted inspection. My confidence was a facade, but it worked. The men retreated, promising to return with proper documentation. As they walked away, I noticed a sheriff's department cruiser idling at the corner of my street. Through my window, I could see Sheriff Sheila herself watching from the driver's seat. Our eyes met briefly before she drove away. They returned the next day with paperwork, an official notice claiming my wheelchair ramp violated county building codes by being excessively steep and improperly anchored. The ramp had been professionally installed 3 years ago with all proper permits and inspections. This was fabrication, pure and simple. I called my caretaker, Maria, who visited twice weekly to help with housekeeping and errands. I will not be able to make it today, she said, sounding nervous. I was pulled over this morning by a sheriff's deputy. They said my tail light was out, but it was working fine. They ran my license for 20 minutes, asked a lot of questions about where I worked, who I visited. They asked about me. I confirmed, my suspicion growing. They did not say your name, but they asked if I provided home care services to anyone in your apartment complex. It was uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, Ray called from his mechanic shop. They were here, he said without preamble. Health inspector and a deputy claimed someone reported improper disposal of automotive fluids. Spent 2 hours going through my paperwork, inspecting every corner of my shop. Found nothing, of course, but they made it clear they would be back. Sheriff Sheila was expanding her tactics. Not content to target me directly, she was now pressuring people associated with me. She was sending a message: help this man and you become a target too. That evening, the local news reported on a county council meeting where Sheriff Sheila had addressed recent community concerns about law enforcement practices. The footage showed her standing confidently at the podium, her uniform crisp, her badge gleaming. My department enforces the law equally for all citizens, she declared. No one is above regulations, regardless of their circumstances. Accusations of selective enforcement are unfounded and, frankly, offensive to the hardworking deputies who serve this community daily. The council members nodded along, none daring to question her. The mayor thanked her for her dedication to uniform justice. It was a masterful performance, putting herself on record as fair and impartial while subtly positioning any complaints as attacks on law enforcement itself. I spent that night compiling everything I had gathered: footage of deputies surveilling my home, documentation of the damaged van, statements from other victims, records of the code violations that contradicted existing permits. I organized it chronologically, creating a timeline that showed not random incidents but an escalating pattern of harassment and intimidation. In the morning, I contacted Lauren from the State Tribune. I am ready, I told her. I have everything you need. Are you certain you want to move forward? She asked. Once this story breaks, there is no going back. Sheriff Sheila will know exactly who exposed her. I thought about my damaged van, about Maria being harassed, about Ray's business being inspected, about the countless others who had paid fines they could not afford because fighting back seemed impossible. I am certain, I replied. She already knows I am not backing down. The difference is, after your story runs, everyone else will know too. As I hung up the phone, I wheeled to my window and looked out at the quiet street below. A sheriff's cruiser drove by slowly, the deputy inside making no attempt to hide his surveillance. I did not duck away. Instead, I remained visible, letting him see me watching him back. The game had changed. Sheriff Sheila thought her badge made her untouchable, but she had miscalculated badly. She had chosen me as a target because she thought my disability made me vulnerable. Instead, it had given me resilience she could not comprehend. Years of navigating a world not built for me had taught me patience, determination, and resourcefulness. She might have the power of her office, but I had something more potent. The truth, meticulously documented and ready for the world to see. Lauren worked quickly. Just 4 days after our meeting, she called to let me know the story would run the following morning. "I just want to confirm you are ready," she said, her voice gentle but serious. "This will change things. There will be attention, some supportive, some hostile. Once we publish, there is no going back." "I understand," I replied. "I have been living with Sheriff Sheila's attention for weeks now. At least this way it will be on my terms. Our legal team has reviewed everything. Your documentation is extraordinarily thorough. The story is solid." She paused. "Try to get some rest tonight. Tomorrow will be intense." I did not sleep that night. I sat by my window, watching sheriff's cruisers pass by with predictable regularity. I wondered if they knew what was coming. I wondered if Sheila knew. Part of me feared retaliation. The larger part felt a strange calm. After weeks of being targeted in shadows, everything would now be dragged into the light. The article appeared online at 6:00 a.m. The headline was bold and unambiguous: "Booted and Broken, Disability and Abuse of Power in Riverdale County." Below it was a photograph of my van with the boot attached, my wheelchair visible in the frame. The contrast was stark, a device designed for mobility and freedom immobilized by official order. Lauren's reporting was meticulous. She detailed my experience chronologically, supported by photographs, video stills, and documentation. She included statements from Harold, Patricia, James, and 5 other disabled citizens who had experienced similar treatment. Ray went on record describing the pattern of harassment he had witnessed among his customers. Most damning was Mr. Rodriguez's eyewitness account of Sheriff Sheila personally overseeing the illegal towing of my van. The article concluded with damning statistics. In Riverdale County, citations for accessible parking violations had increased 340% since Sheriff Sheila took office, while enforcement of other traffic violations remained stable. The fines collected specifically from disability-related infractions had generated over $180,000 for the department in the past year alone. By 8:00 a.m., my phone was ringing constantly. Local television stations wanted interviews. Disability rights organizations offered support. Attorneys specializing in civil rights cases left messages expressing interest in representing me. I had expected attention, but nothing like this tsunami of response. At 10:30 a.m., a producer from CNN called. "We want to send a crew today," she explained. "This story is gaining national traction. People are outraged." By noon, my story had spread beyond Lauren's initial article. Social media accounts were sharing screenshots and summaries. Hashtags like Booted and Broken and Sheriff Sheila were trending regionally. The conversation was expanding beyond my personal experience to broader issues of law enforcement accountability and disability rights. My neighbor Mr. Rodriguez knocked on my door around 2:00 p.m. His face was drawn with concern. "There have been sheriff's deputies photographing your van again," he reported. Different ones this time. They seemed angry. "Are you worried about having spoken out?" I asked him. He straightened his shoulders. "I am 82 years old. I survived a war. I am not afraid of a badge and a bad attitude." His courage strengthened my own. I agreed to CNN's interview request, scheduling it for the following morning. I wanted to be prepared, to be clear about my message. This was no longer just about my van or my mistreatment. It had become about systemic abuse of power. That evening, the county council issued a carefully worded statement. "We take allegations of improper enforcement seriously and are reviewing the concerns raised in today's reporting. We are committed to ensuring all county services are delivered equitably and within proper legal boundaries." Sheila's office maintained silence throughout the day. The sheriff's department's social media accounts posted nothing. No deputies were made available for comment. The vacuum of official response was telling. They had been caught unprepared for the public scrutiny. As the sun set, I received one final call that day, this one from Harold, the retired teacher I had met at the diner. "Have you heard?" he asked, his voice animated. "Sheila has scheduled a special law enforcement visibility rally for Friday." "What does that mean?" "No one knows exactly. The announcement just went out. It says she will address recent mischaracterizations of departmental procedure and demonstrate the vital role of proactive enforcement in maintaining community safety." I could almost admire her audacity. Rather than retreat, Sheila was mounting a counteroffensive. She would not surrender her authority or admit wrongdoing. She would double down, reframing her harassment as public service. "Will you go?" Harold asked. "I would not miss it," I replied. That night, as I prepared for bed, I noticed something different through my window. For the first time in weeks, there were no sheriff's cruisers circling my block. The harassment had paused, not out of respect or remorse, but out of strategic necessity. The spotlight had grown too bright for their shadowy intimidation. I received an email from Lauren just before midnight. It contained a single sentence: "Over 50,000 shares and counting." What had begun as my personal fight against one corrupt official had transformed overnight into something much larger. People across the country were reading about Riverdale County, about Sheriff Sheila, about a system that allowed power to prey on vulnerability. My private humiliation had become a public reckoning. As I finally drifted toward sleep, I thought about Sheila's upcoming rally. She still believed she could control this narrative. She still thought her badge would shield her from consequences. She had no idea that the real trial was just beginning, and it would not take place in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. The game had changed, and for the first time I was not simply reacting to her moves. I was making my own. The CNN interview aired nationally the day after Lauren's article was published. The producer had sent a crew to my home, transforming my living room into an impromptu studio. The reporter was professional but empathetic, allowing me to tell my story in my own words. "What do you hope comes from sharing your experience?" she asked near the end of our conversation. I had considered this question carefully. "Justice is not just about what happens to Sheriff Sheila," I answered. "It is about changing a system that gave her the power to target vulnerable citizens without oversight. It is about making sure no one else with a disability has to fear being stranded or humiliated simply for existing in public space." By that afternoon, 3 attorneys had contacted me offering pro bono representation. I selected Eleanor Martinez, a former Department of Justice lawyer who specialized in civil rights and disability law. Her firm had a national reputation for taking on systemic discrimination cases. This is not just an isolated incident of harassment, Alina explained during our first meeting. This is a pattern of official misconduct that violates the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act, and potentially several civil rights statutes. We can pursue this not just as a personal injury case, but as a federal civil rights action. She outlined a strategy that went beyond seeking damages for my specific experiences. We would petition for structural reforms in the sheriff's department, mandatory training programs, and independent oversight mechanisms. "Are you prepared for how difficult this will be?" she asked frankly. "Federal lawsuits move slowly. Sheila has resources and political connections. This will get personal and ugly before it gets better." "It already is personal," I replied, "and it has been ugly from the start." Within 48 hours, Alina filed a federal civil rights lawsuit naming Sheriff Sheila, the Sheriff's Department, and Riverdale County as defendants. The complaint was comprehensive, 63 pages detailing not just my experiences, but those of 7 other disabled citizens who had come forward. It cited violations of federal accessibility laws, harassment, intimidation, property damage, and abuse of authority. The response was immediate. National disability rights organizations issued statements of support. The National Association for Advancement of Disabled Persons announced they would file an amicus brief supporting our case. 3 state senators called for an independent investigation of the sheriff's department. Sheriff Sheila finally broke her silence, releasing a written statement through her newly hired attorney. "The allegations against my department are politically motivated and based on misunderstandings of proper law enforcement procedure. My deputies enforce laws equally for all citizens, regardless of status or circumstance. These claims lack merit and context, and we look forward to addressing them through proper legal channels rather than trial by media." Her legal team followed with a motion to dismiss, arguing that the citations and enforcement actions were discretionary, legitimate exercises of police power. They characterized the claims as isolated incidents magnified by media attention, and attempted to shift blame to miscommunication and individual deputies' judgment calls. Alina was unimpressed. "Standard defensive tactics," she said dismissively. "They are trying to create distance between Sheila and the actual enforcement actions. They want to paint this as a few deputies being overzealous, not as systematic targeting that came from the top." What Sheila and her legal team did not know was that we had been holding back our most damning evidence, waiting for precisely this moment, when they would try to distance her from direct involvement. The press conference was Alina's idea. We scheduled it for 3 days after Sheila's motion to dismiss, giving journalists time to digest the sheriff's denial and creating space for our counter-narrative. I sat beside Alina at a table in the conference room of her law firm. Cameras clicked and lights flashed as she introduced me and summarized our case. Then she turned to a large screen behind us. "Sheriff Sheila has claimed she had no direct involvement in targeting disabled citizens," Alina stated calmly. "We would like to present evidence to the contrary." The video that played came from one of Ray's hidden cameras, installed in my van 2 weeks earlier. It clearly showed Sheriff Sheila standing beside my parked vehicle at 1:43 a.m., speaking to 2 deputies. Her voice was unmistakable. "I want this van gone tonight. Not ticketed, not booted, removed. I am tired of seeing it. I do not care where you take it or what citation you use. Get that van off my street." The room fell silent as the video ended. Alina continued, "We have additional footage, audio recordings, and sworn statements demonstrating that Sheriff Sheila personally directed a campaign of harassment against my client and other disabled citizens. This was not miscommunication. This was not overzealous deputies. This was targeted intimidation ordered directly by the sheriff herself. By evening, the video was playing on every major news network. Social media exploded with outrage. Hashtags evolved from Sheriff Sheila to Sheriff Sheila resign. The governor's office released a statement calling the footage disturbing and promising a state-level review of the department. Sheila's legal team scrambled to control the damage, releasing a second statement claiming the video was taken out of context and asserting that the van had been legitimately subject to removal under county ordinances. But their defensive posture had shifted noticeably. Their language was less confident, their stance less absolute. That night, Alina called with unexpected news. "We have been contacted by 3 deputies from Sheila's department," she said. "They want to speak with us confidentially. They say they have information about direct orders from Sheila to target disabled citizens for citations and harassment." "Will they go on record?" I asked. "Not yet. They fear retaliation. But they are considering it, especially after seeing the public response to your case." The lawsuit had transformed from a single citizen's complaint into a movement. What Sheila had failed to understand was that her power existed within a larger system of accountability, one that was now awakening to her abuses. She had believed her badge made her untouchable. She was about to discover how wrong she had been. The federal judge assigned to our case, Honorable Rebecca Townsend, denied Sheriff Sheila's motion to dismiss within 48 hours of our press conference. Her ruling was pointed. The evidence presented raises substantial questions about systematic violations of federal protections that cannot be dismissed without thorough examination. More significantly, Judge Townsend ordered an immediate preservation of all departmental records, communications, and enforcement data. No files could be deleted, no citations shredded, no evidence removed from county servers. The sheriff's department was officially on notice and under judicial supervision. What followed was unprecedented in Riverdale County. The state attorney general announced a formal investigation into the sheriff's office, separate from our civil lawsuit. A team of investigators arrived to interview deputies, review records, and examine departmental procedures. Their focus was not just on my case, but on the entire culture and practice of law enforcement under Sheriff Sheila's leadership. The first crack in the blue wall appeared a week later. 3 deputies requested whistleblower protection and gave sworn statements to state investigators. Their testimony was damning. They described Sheila's explicit instructions to target high-value citations, meaning violations that would generate the largest fines with the least resistance. Disabled citizens, elderly drivers, and low-income residents were specifically identified as priorities. Sheriff Sheila called it revenue enhancement through strategic enforcement. One deputy testified anonymously, his face obscured during a televised interview. She established quota systems for deputies. Those who brought in the most revenue received better shifts and overtime opportunities. Those who failed to meet quotas were assigned to overnight patrols or desk duty. Another deputy revealed the existence of a departmental spreadsheet tracking citations by category, with disabled parking violations highlighted as high yield, low contest, meaning they generated significant revenue and were rarely challenged in court. Most disturbing was the revelation that Sheila had created a watch list of problem citizens who had questioned her authority or filed complaints. My name had been added to this list after my first visit to the sheriff's office. Once on the list, Individuals were subjected to increased surveillance, selective enforcement, and what one deputy described as attention that would encourage them to either comply or leave the county. The County Ethics Board convened an emergency session and subpoenaed Sheriff Sheila to testify under oath. The hearing was public, televised, and packed with journalists, activists, and citizens. I sat in the front row in my wheelchair, a leaner beside me, as Sheila entered the chamber. She looked smaller somehow, less imposing without the shield of her authority. Her uniform was still crisp, her posture still rigid, but her eyes darted nervously around the room. For a brief moment our gazes met. I did not see remorse, only calculation. For 4 hours, Sheila attempted to defend her actions. She cited budget constraints that necessitated creative funding solutions. She referenced unspecified public safety concerns that justified increased enforcement. She denied personal involvement in individual citations, contradicting the video evidence and deputy testimonies. When confronted with the whistleblower statements, she dismissed them as disgruntled employees seeking to avoid responsibility for their own decisions. When shown the spreadsheet categorizing disabled citizens as high-yield targets, she claimed no knowledge of its creation or use. The Ethics Board was unpersuaded. The chair, a retired judge named William Hargrove, asked directly, "Sheriff Sheila, do you deny giving specific orders to remove Mr. Reynolds' van from a legal parking space on the night in question, as shown in the video evidence?" Sheila hesitated, visibly calculating her options. "The video does not show the full context of that situation," she evaded. "That was not my question," Judge Hargrove pressed. "Did you or did you not give that specific order?" Under oath, with cameras recording her every expression, Sheila finally conceded. "I gave an order regarding that vehicle, yes." That admission became the turning point. More victims came forward with documentation of their own experiences, receipts for excessive fines, photographs of improper boots and toes, recordings of threatening encounters with deputies acting under Sheila's orders. The trickle of evidence became a flood. Media coverage was relentless. National news programs ran special segments on policing for profit and predatory enforcement. Disability advocacy groups organized protests outside the sheriff's office. Social media campaigns shared stories of similar abuses in other jurisdictions, suggesting that Riverdale County might be just one example of a more widespread problem. Through it all, I watched from my wheelchair as the system of accountability, slow to awaken but powerful once engaged, began to function as intended. The truth was emerging, not through any single revelation, but through the accumulated weight of evidence, testimony, and public attention. What had begun with a yellow boot on my van had evolved into a comprehensive examination of power, its proper use, and its potential for abuse. Sheriff Sheila had believed herself untouchable. Now she sat in hearings day after day, watching as her carefully constructed empire of intimidation crumbled under scrutiny. The trial had moved beyond Sheila herself to encompass the entire system that had enabled her. And I was no longer just a victim seeking justice, but a catalyst for change that would reach far beyond my own experience. Winter turned to spring as the investigations continued. Our federal lawsuit proceeded alongside the state inquiry, each uncovering new layers of misconduct within the sheriff's department. The evidence mounted week by week. Internal emails directing deputies to target disabled parking spaces for maximum revenue generation. Training materials that outline profiles of citation-susceptible individuals, and disciplinary actions against deputies who had questioned these practices. Throughout these revelations, I continued my daily life as best I could. My van had been returned and repaired at county expense, an early concession from Sheila's increasingly desperate legal team. But the cost had been high. My savings were depleted. The emotional toll of constant depositions, interviews, and public scrutiny left me exhausted. You could settle, Alina suggested during one particularly difficult day. They have offered a substantial payment and a formal apology. No one would blame you for accepting it and putting this behind you. I considered her words carefully. The offer was generous, enough money to replace my van with a newer model, to secure my financial future, to rebuild the life that had been disrupted. But it came with conditions. No admission of systematic wrongdoing, no structural changes to the department, no accountability beyond Sheila herself. If I accept that offer, what happens to the next person who rolls up to a parking space and gets targeted? What happens to the system that gave Sheila her power in the first place? I shook my head. I cannot settle for money alone. This was never just about me. Alina smiled, a look of respect in her eyes. I hoped you would say that. The structural remedies are what really matter here. The County Ethics Board reached its verdict in late April, 9 months after that first yellow boot appeared on my van. Their conclusion was unequivocal. Sheriff Sheila had engaged in systemic abuse of authority, discriminatory enforcement practices, and violations of federally protected rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The board recommended immediate removal from office, forfeiture of pension, and referral to the state licensing board for potential revocation of her law enforcement credentials. Most significantly, they found that her actions constituted willful and knowing violations of federal civil rights protections, a finding that opened the door to state-level criminal charges. The county commissioners voted unanimously to accept these recommendations. Sheriff Sheila was stripped of her badge and title, effective immediately. An interim sheriff was appointed from outside the department to oversee reforms while a special election was scheduled. State prosecutors moved quickly, filing charges for civil rights violations, misconduct in office, and fraudulent misappropriation of funds. The evidence we had gathered for our civil case provided the foundation for their criminal prosecution. Our federal lawsuit concluded not with a courtroom verdict, but with a consent decree, a comprehensive settlement that went far beyond monetary damages. Riverdale County agreed to implement expansive reforms, mandatory training on disability rights, and ADA compliance for all officers, an independent review board with citizen representation to evaluate all citation patterns and enforcement actions, body cameras for all deputies with automatic activation during any enforcement encounter, transparent reporting of all fines collected, categorized by violation type and demographic information. The financial settlement was substantial, not just for me, but for every disabled citizen who had been targeted under Sheila's leadership. More meaningful than the money was the county's public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and commitment to structural change. The press gathered outside the federal courthouse on the day the consent decree was finalized. Cameras pointed at me as I wheeled to the microphone set up on the steps. Today marks not an ending but a beginning, I stated, my voice steady. What happened in Riverdale County was not unique or isolated. Across this country, people with disabilities face barriers, discrimination, and selective enforcement every day. Many lack the resources or support to fight back. This case was never just about me or about Sheriff Sheila. It was about creating accountability in systems that too often operate without it. I paused, looking at the faces before me, journalists, activists, ordinary citizens who had followed this case for months. The yellow boot that was placed on my van did not just immobilize my vehicle. It was meant to immobilize my spirit, my dignity, my right to exist in public space. Today, that boot has been permanently removed, not just from my van, but from our system of justice. As I finished speaking, a woman in a wheelchair approached from the crowd. I recognized her from the hearings, one of the other victims who had testified. Without a word, she reached out and squeezed my hand. Behind her, others came forward, the elderly veteran, the teacher with a walker, the parent of a disabled child. One by one, they surrounded me in a circle of silent solidarity. In that moment, I understood something profound. This victory belonged not to me alone, but to all of us who had found our voices after being silenced. For the first time in a very long time, I felt truly seen, not as a man in a wheelchair, but as a citizen with rights that no badge could supersede. The wheels of justice had finally turned. 1 year later, I wheeled my van into the parking lot of Westfield Market, the same grocery store where this journey had begun. I parked in the same accessible space, displayed my permit properly on the dashboard, and sat for a moment, remembering. No yellow boot awaited me when I returned with my groceries. Instead, I noticed something new. The accessible spaces had been repainted, widened, and increased in number. A small sign beneath the standard blue symbol read, "Protected by County Ordinance 457, the Reynolds Accessibility Act." I smiled at that. The county commissioners had named the new accessibility standards after me, despite my protests that many others had contributed to the change. "Your case was the catalyst," they had insisted. "The name will remind everyone that one person can truly make a difference." My life had found a new rhythm in the months following the verdict. The financial settlement allowed me to replace my van with a newer model featuring advanced adaptive technology. I had renovated my apartment with improved accessibility features. Most meaningfully, I had accepted an appointment to the newly formed State Commission for Accessibility Justice, where I worked alongside legal experts and advocates to review and reform enforcement policies across the state. Sheriff Sheila had pleaded guilty to reduced charges rather than face trial. She served 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation and community service, specifically working with disability service organizations. I had supported this sentence, believing that education and exposure would accomplish more than extended incarceration. The sheriff's department itself had undergone a complete transformation. Under new leadership, deputies received comprehensive training on disability rights and accessibility laws. The predatory citation system had been replaced with a community-oriented approach focused on education and assistance rather than punishment. As I rolled through town, I noticed other changes as well. New curb cuts had been installed at intersections. Businesses that had previously been inaccessible now featured ramps and automated doors. At the county courthouse, the steep steps that had once made entry impossible for wheelchair users had been supplemented with an elegant ramp integrated into the historic architecture. People recognized me as I shopped or dined out. Some approached to thank me, others simply nodded in acknowledgement. A few former deputies, those who had blown the whistle or testified against Sheila, had become allies and even friends. One had told me, "You freed us too. Working under her system corrupted what policing should be about." Not everything had changed, of course. I still encountered occasional barriers, still faced moments of frustration navigating a world not fully designed for wheelchair users. But the atmosphere had shifted. When I pointed out accessibility issues now, business owners and officials responded with action rather than dismissal. On a warm evening in June, I received an unexpected visitor, Judge Hargrove from the Ethics Board. He had retired fully now and asked to speak with me privately. "I have been thinking about your case for months," he admitted as we sat on my porch. "About how long it took for anyone to challenge Sheriff Sheila's authority, about how many people suffered before action was taken." He looked at me directly. "I was on the county commission when she was first elected. I saw early signs of her approach but did nothing, thinking it was just aggressive enforcement. I bear some responsibility for what happened." "You also bear responsibility for stopping it," I reminded him. He nodded thoughtfully. "The systems we build are only as good as the courage we have to use them. Your courage taught me that." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I wheeled along the path by the river, a path that had recently been paved to make it accessible for all. I passed families, joggers, elderly couples enjoying the evening air. A woman with a guide dog nodded as we passed. A man teaching his daughter to ride an adaptive bicycle waved. I thought about the yellow boot that had started this journey. At the time, it had seemed like the end of something. My independence, my dignity, my freedom to move through the world on my own terms. Instead, it had become a beginning. They had tried to immobilize me, to make me small and afraid. They had failed. The former deputy's words echoed in my mind. "You freed us too." Perhaps that was the most important lesson of this entire experience. Injustice constrains everyone it touches, those who suffer under it directly, those who enforce it, those who witness it in silence. Liberation, when it comes, lifts everyone. As I turned my van toward home, I noticed a sheriff's cruiser parked nearby. For a brief moment, old anxiety flickered. Then the new sheriff stepped out and raised a hand in greeting. "Just checking that the path is working well for everyone," she explained. "We want to make sure it stays accessible year-round." I nodded and continued on my way, rolling forward into a future I had helped create. They had tried to stop my wheels. Instead, they had given me a path, and I was just getting started.